Halacha Aleph. Rambam says, "Einosim Melochim im Odom ba'olam ad shekurim leRishonim." You cannot wage war with any nation. It's even a person until you call to him to peace. Why use the word Odom before you wage war? Echad Melochim is Avashus, the Peirush says, and Echad Melochim is mitzvah, or if it's a war of commanding. Now, in Perikei, we say mitzvahs were the mitzvahs of destroying the 7 nations that lived in Canaan and Amalek, and saving the Jews from an enemy that comes against them. Shenamar, as it says in Dvorim 20, verse 10, when you shall come close to a city and call out to it, you will call out to it for peace. That's an obligation. Im ishlimu, if they then went ahead and agreed to the peace, which includes the obligation of keeping the 7 Noahide commandments, you leave them live. They will be taxed and support you. As it says there in verse 11, they shall be for you as a tax, they will serve you. Now, if they want to pay the tax but they do not want to be servile, or the servitude but not the tax, they have to accept both obligations. When they say slaves, it means meaning that they should be downgraded and humbled, meaning that they have to be on a status lower than that of a Jew. They are the servants of the king. They should not be able to lift up their heads against a Jew. They should remain as a conquered people. And they should not be equated as a Jew, as the rights of a Jew, for anything that is in the effect regarding their lifestyle. And the tax that they will be taxed, they should be ready to serve the king, both with their physical bodies and with their money, such as being like building the walls around the cities, and strengthening the fortified cities, being and building the king's palace. As it says in Melochim Aleph, chapter 9, verse 15. And this is the tax that the king raised. Build his house, the house of Hashem, as Beisoy, in his own house, and also where they had to fill in, and the walls of Jerusalem. It's called and also all the miskenois, all those fortified cities that Shlomo had. All of the people that were left from the Amorites, he caused them to be slaves to serve until today. That's in verse 22. From Bnei Yisrael, he did not take to work as a slave, except for warriors, his own personal attendants, and his rulers, and those who advised them, and those who were head of the chariots, and of the armored warriors. This is regards to when Rambam says both for war of mitzvah, war of Melochim. The Rebbe disagrees. That when it comes to a Melochim, which is a chosen war, they do only have to serve taxes they pay. Because the Mishnah explains, according to Rambam, in order to make an agreement with them for peace, they have to accept the 7 mitzvahs, and they also have to be taxed. According to the Rebbe, when it's a war, a chosen war, they do not have to keep the 7 mitzvahs. The Rebbe adds But Rebbe doesn't mean that when it's a war of choice, it's enough that he should take the tax without servitude, because in Sifri it says that we don't listen to them in that situation. But the intent is that in a war of choice, we do not force them to keep the 7 mitzvahs. If they want to afterwards to live and dwell in Eretz Yisrael, they have to accept the 7 mitzvahs. That's an obligation for anyone who lives in Israel. And he adds, that would seem the fact from the Rambam, that he immediately says you should accept the tax, and he doesn't mention the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. But the Ridvan says it would seem from Halacha Dalet that Rambam is of the opinion that it is a condition when you send to ask to make peace before we wage war. And it says if they do not agree, or they agree and they do not accept the 7 mitzvahs, then you make war, wage war, and you kill all the males that are adults, because the obligation of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach is something that impedes the ability to make a peace agreement. But the Rae Gann is of the opinion that the 7 mitzvahs are not something that is obligation of regarding not waging war when it's a war of choice. According to the Rae Gann, it is permitted to live in Eretz Yisrael only by Noach who keeps the 7 mitzvahs. Like we find in Avodah Zarah, that the time that Yisrael is in charge of Eretz Yisrael, then you can't leave go do Avodah Zarah amongst us, even temporarily so. Even if he goes traveling through on business, he cannot go through until he accepts the 7 mitzvahs that the Bnei Noach are commanded, as it says in Shmos 23, verse 33. They shall not dwell in your land, even temporarily. If they can't keep the 7 mitzvahs, they are considered a temporary sojourner, and he can stay dwell in the land, and he's called Ger Toshav, because the acceptance of the 7 mitzvahs enables him to be live in Eretz Yisrael. The Ravaz's questions, maybe the 7 mitzvahs is not a condition of making peace, only if they want to live in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, he wants to make a half point between the Rambam and the Rae Gann. For peace, and this is the 12th mitzvah from the 23 that we mentioned at the beginning of the forward to help us Melochim. Send peace to the people you are going to besiege, and as we'll see, you have to negotiate with them, as it says in the Torah, if they will agree, even if they won't agree. That not only the calling out the peace is a mitzvah, but even negotiating is also part of that. Save our mitzvahs. The Rambam counts this as mitzvah 190. That is the judgment that we have in wars against other nations. That you have to judge properly with the other nations when it's a chosen war, a war of choice, because we are commanded when we fight with other nations that we can promise them their lives. We will not kill them if they agree to come to an understanding, and they have to agree to give us their land and to pay taxes and be servitude. And that's what it says. They shall be your for taxes and serve you. And the Sifri in Peirush HaMeir says, if they say we accept taxes but not servitude, or servitude and not taxes, you don't listen to them. So they accept both. And taxes, they should give a certain amount every year, as according to the king says at that time. And the obligation is they should be under the rulership, and they have to understand that they're second-grade citizens. If they do not agree, we are obligated to kill all the adult males that are in the country, take all of that they have, as well as their wives, That's what it says in the Pasuk, Devarim 20, verse 12. If they will not come to peace, and then this is all regarding a mitzvah of rishus, a mitzvah of a melchama of choice. The Rambam writes, both war of choice and one war of obligation. Rashi explains in the Sifri that by a war of choice it's talking about, as it says there, and so you shall do to all the nations that are distant from you, which have nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban argues that the intent of the Sifri is there's a difference in laws regarding a war of choice and a war of commandment only at the end of the parsha, but to call to peace, one has to do both by a war of commandment as well, and he brings proof because that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. It says, first he asked Sihon for peace, and he was from the 7 nations, and Moshe was not transgressing on destroying them, even though he was king of the Amorites, or nor on the negative commandment of you should not leave anyone remain alive. So how could he make peace? And it could be the difference between a war of mitzvah and a war of permissibility is only when they do not come to peace. If they're not from the 7 nations, you have to leave the women and the children remain alive. But if they're from the 7 nations who do not come to peace, you have to destroy also the women and the children. But you have to call to peace even by a melchama which is commanded, and he brings a medrash. In Dvorim, it's found in Yerushalmi also, Omar Bishma Bar Nachman, Yeshua ben Nun Kiyam Parashas Zurei. Yeshua ben Nun kept this commandment. Shesholach Igeras L'chol Mokim Sheholach Lichbosh. He sent a letter to every place they went to conquer, that if those who want to come to an agreement should come to an agreement, and those who want to leave can leave, and those who want to do war should do war. And the Girgoshi, actually one of the 7 nations, they left. The Gevonim accepted servitude. 31 kings that came to wage war, HaKadosh Baruch Hu threw them down in war. Yeshua killed them. As it says, there was no nation that came to a peace agreement with the Bnei Yisrael except for the Chivi, those who live in Givon. Everything they took otherwise through war. Kimeis Hashem Hoiso, it was from God's will to strengthen Hachazaka es Libom, strengthen their heart to call to war against the Jewish people in order they should be destroyed. Rambam, Halacha says 30 crowns Yeshua sent. No, sorry, I read that wrong. 3 letters were sent by Yeshua till they didn't get into Eretz Yisrael. The first one was that whoever wants to flee may flee. Then he sent the second letter. Whoever wants to come to peace, to agreement, will come to an agreement, with meanings, servitude, etc. The third time he wrote them, whoever wants to wage war, you should know we're coming to war. The Ramban adds, there's another difference between Melchemes Mitzvah and Melchemes Rishus, a war of choice, when they came to peace. That if they're not from the 7 nations, they can servitude and work. But for the 7 nations, we ask them for peace and servitude, only the condition that they accept that they will not serve idols. It says, but regarding them, Yishmois 23:33, they shall not dwell in your land, lest they cause you to sin, because they will service their idols, and you will learn from them. There could be, you have to let them know this even when waging war of commandment. Only on payment of taxes and shibud and obligations, and the posuk, they shall be servants. And once they are in servitude, we tell them that we have judges who judge people who who serve idols to death, and therefore they have to accept on themselves not to serve idols. As it says, as it says in Devarim 20, verse 18, so that they should not teach you to do as they do their evil ways. And it's brought in the Sifri. If they do tshuva, they're not killed, even by the 7 nations that accepted upon themselves the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, even though they do not they do not become full converts, but they become a ger toisho, that they accept the 7 Noahide commandments, they can dwell in Eretz Yisrael. Thus we see that the Ramban learns from the Sifri like the Ravid, that only by a Melochim which is ordained by heaven, like the 7 nations, they have to accept the 7 mitzvahs. But now when it comes to a Melochim a war of choice, the Rambam is the opinion that doesn't matter, they have to accept the 7 mitzvahs. The Ramban cites from Soita 35b that they wrote all the Torah when they entered Israel on large stones, and covered it with sid, which is lime, and they wrote on it in 70 languages. So Shimon adds, they wrote at the bottom that in order they should not teach us all their evil ways, and if the nations would repent, we would accept them. So Rashi explains that they wrote that regarding the nations that sit around Eretz Yisrael, but not from the 7 nations, because the other nations we were not commanded to destroy, and therefore if they do tshuva, we accept them. But those who live in Eretz Yisrael, we are obligated to destroy them. So we should not learn from their evil ways. And even if they do tshuva, we don't accept it, because they only repented out of fear. And only those who live outside the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, if they do true, we accept them. Ramban disagrees and says that's not correct, because in the cities of Eretz Yisrael, it says we should not learn from them. If they do tshuva, they are not killed. And even if they do tshuva in Eretz Yisrael, they can remain. And so it says in Shmoyes 23:33, they should not dwell there lest they cause you to sin. But if they've done tshuva, then they are permitted to remain. So as we find the Ramban is the opinion like the Rambam, that when it comes to a war of choice, when you want to go and make peace first, you can leave them live if they if they accepted not to serve idols and to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. But he disagrees with the Rambam when it comes to a war of choice, and he's of the opinion that they do not have to accept on themselves the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. The Ramban brings from Shlomo HaMelech. It says in Melochim 1, chapter 9, verse 21, that all the people that were left from the Amori, Achiti, Aprizi, Achiva, Erusi, their sons which were left to them in the land, that Klal Yisrael could not destroy them, and Shlomo brought them up to be as a tax and servants till today. And Bnei Yisrael, Shlomo did not give a slave, and Shlomo did according to the Torah. We see from that he gave them to do the work. Once he ruled over them, he could have killed them, but he was permitted to keep them because they kept the 7 mitzvahs. They accepted the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. Otherwise, what does it mean that he could not destroy them? He couldn't destroy them because of the instruction to make peace. The Ramban, Maimonides explains in the Pasuk in Devarim 20, verse 11, that they shall be for you as taxes and as slaves, like Rashi, until they accept upon themselves taxes and servitude. As you find in the Sifri, if they agree to accept only taxes or only servitude, you don't listen to them, like the Rambam. The Rambam explains what the Rambam did not clarify: who puts on the tax, and he states that the king of Israel orders on that to decide how much is needed for the building of the king and the cities that are fortified. and so too the building of the Beis HaMikdash, as it says in the Pasuk, that Shlomo HaMelech took slaves to build the Beis Hashem. Also, in regard to the servitude, there's a disagreement between the Nachmanides and the Maimonides whether they should be non-adults, and they should be humbled and of lesser stature than the regular citizens, that every Jewish person can take for them them to have them hew the wood and gather the water, and he pays them. That means to work. This is Melochim, that they accepted taxes and servitude according to the Torah, and not like we found in Shoftim 1:28. And when Israel was strong, and they placed the Canaanim to tax, and they inherited their lands, it doesn't mention servitude. That only that they pay a sort of a graft to the king who is stronger than him. They should not fight with him. So to the Canaanim paid that Yisrael should not fight with them. Hanina Lachaye, of the Baal Knesset HaGodol, on Sefer Mitzvahs, cites that from Sefer Mitzvahs that calling out to peace is a commandment only by a war of choice and not by a war of obligation. And he explains that the Rambam does not mean to say that it's only valid by a war of choice, but since the Rambam did not count in the mitzvahs that are obligated, when it comes to a war of choice, that we're not commanded to kill all the males if they do not come to peace, as it says, if they shall not make peace with you and you shall destroy all their males, does not apply by a war of choice. Just like when it comes to the obligation of the mitzvahs by the war of mitzvah, he does say no one's permitted to remain alive. Therefore, he emphasizes that the Rambam is considered all part of one mitzvah, and the mitzvah that were commanded to do war in other nations that call to peace, they do not come to peace. You have to destroy all of their males, and everything is one mitzvah. And therefore, the Rambam doesn't add it as a second mitzvah. It's a subheading of the mitzvah. And he only mentions the war of choice to tell you that it is included in calling out to peace, because just when you go out to wage war, even if it's choice, but certainly by Mechamis Mitzvah, you also have the obligation to tell them that they can go with peace as long as they accept the terms as cited before.